session. So, welcome to today's webinar, Unlocking Leadership. For those of you who perhaps don't know me, my name is Michelle McArthur-Morgan and I'm the Senior Learning and Wellbeing Consultant and actually founding partner at Jigsaw at Work and creator of the Jigsaw Discovery Tool, which is a behavioural profiling tool that we use in learning development programmes around the world. And we have a global network of learning development consultants and in-house professionals who deliver the Jigsaw learning experience, both face-to-face and now virtually. And some of our clients include people, organisations, Haribo, Arriva Bus and Trains, NHS Trust, and Sense are just a few of the kind of clients that you may well have heard of. The aim of the webinar today is to spend some time considering the possible behaviours and reactions we're likely to see as the country starts to unlock an organisation, move towards establishing the new norms, whatever that may be, of working. And one thing that I'm sure of is that as we go forward, we'll see many more hybrid teams and opportunities for more flexible working. And hopefully with that will come that increased choice and autonomy for employees. And as a consequence of all those changes, the need for a different style of leadership requiring a different mindset and skill set. During the webinar today, we're going to be discussing how our employees have perceived the events of 2020 and their experience of living and working through the COVID-19 pandemic. We're going to be considering the impact of grief and survivor's guilt and what will that actually mean for our leaders. We're going to consider the leadership shortage. What is the reality and are we doing enough to identify and nurture talent in our organisations? And towards the end of the session, we'll be looking at the skills required to future-proof our leaders and upskill our leaders. I want to start the webinar today by spending some time to set the scene and provide you with some insights into the thinking and behaviours that we may well see as we start to establish the new norms of living and working in the 21st century. There's no getting away from the profound effect that COVID-19 pandemic has had upon our lives, at home, at work and at play. We are all very aware of the huge number of people who've either lost their job, been furloughed, or had their income drastically reduced. For many people, 2020 has been about being forced to work from home and coping with all of the additional pressures of juggling with childcare, homeschooling, work, and looking after the home and the family. But we must also remember that there is a large number of people who could not work from home. And all through the pandemic, even when the number of infection rates and hospitalizations and sadly deaths were going off the charts, some people had to continue going to work to provide those essential services for the rest of us. They were putting their lives at risk to help protect, feed and care all of us. But how did that feel for them? What was going on for them? How was the pressure impacting upon them? The whole nation, and indeed throughout the world, people were worried about their health, the health of their family and friends, the economy, the security of their jobs, the immediate income, the long-term effects of the pandemic, and so the list goes on. At Jigsaw Discovery, we work with people helping them to understand more about themselves and their behaviours. We help people to understand more about the way they think about and react to stressful situations. And this has provided us with insights to help individuals and organisations as they begin to unlock and adapt to the changes that COVID-19 has brought about, both at work and more generally in our everyday lives. To help set the scene, I want to share with you some key findings of some research that was carried out at the end of last year, actually, by the Myers-Briggs company. And they looked at the relationship between an individual's behavioural preferences and their perception of living and working during the pandemic. And I've just picked out some of the kind of highlights that hopefully will set the scene for today. When the people taking part in the research were asked to describe their feelings about COVID-19, as you may expect, they were mostly negative. Although a few people did respond with more positive words, such as optimistic and hope and opportunity. According to the research, the possibility of the economy going into recession was by far the biggest concern. When people were asked more specifically, however, about their working lives, many people tended to give a more positive response. This was especially true in the case of people who were working remotely, but also applied to a large number of the non remote workers. The conclusion was that people felt more negative about the wider concerns of the pandemic than they did about their day to day lived experiences. They were more concerned about the bigger picture of the pandemic and how it was affecting others. They were also feeling increased levels of stress. But generally speaking, those who were in work felt positive about their jobs. Now, this could be linked to the fact that the big picture was unknown and out of the individual's control, whereas with their jobs, they felt they had possibly a little bit more control. People working from home tended to view the situation more positively than the non-remote workers. The concerns of people who continued to go into the workplace expressed increased concerns about their family, friends, co-workers. And this can be explained by the fact that they were not able to isolate in the same way that the people who were working from home could do. Behavioral preferences had a significant impact upon people's responses. People with more feeling preference tended to have more negative views than people with a preference for thinking. To a lesser extent, the same was true of people with a sensing preference compared to those with a preference for intuition. And when asked about remote working, it was people with a more extrovert preference who expressed more negative views than the introverts. When asked about remote working, most people appreciated being able to work from home. However, people with a preference for extroversion reported being more likely to miss the contact with other people and found that working from home was too quiet for them, to the point that they actually became quite concerned about becoming too isolated. They also actually reported watching more TV and Netflix than they did prior to the pandemic. It was found that with people with a preference for sensing were significantly more concerned than people with a preference for intuition. And some of the things they were more concerned about were managing their levels of motivation, having children at home for extended periods of time, being able to manage their own stress levels, and actually finding it quite difficult to stay focused whilst working from home. Whereas people with a preference for intuition actually reported feeling more motivated and they were actually enjoying the peace and quiet of working from home. People with a higher preference for feeling were more likely to use negative and emotive words when talking about their feelings for the pandemic. They expressed significantly more concern about managing motivation, conflict, and their level of stress. They were also worried about their productivity whilst working from home, and their relationship with their spouse or partner was also of some concern to them. Overall, they were significantly less appreciative about working from home and found it hard to be engaged and were much less positive about using the virtual tools than people who had a higher preference for thinking. It was also people who had a preference for feeling who were the most likely to feel guilty about having a job when so many other people had lost theirs or been furloughed. And just to kind of conclude this section, the opening scene setting section, An observation noted about the research was that the people who responded later to the survey, and I think this survey was conducted from between May to September, October last year, but the people who responded later to the survey expressed more frustration and anger about the situation in comparison to the early respondents. Therefore, it may be possible to conclude that the levels of frustration and anger employees are feeling is on the increase. And this could be an important insight to factor into discussions and plans when thinking about if and when and how people will return to the workplace. I hope that you'll agree that the research has highlighted some important and interesting insights into how people have been experiencing and perceiving the last 12 months. Insights which will help leaders to make informed choices about the way to start unlocking our workspaces and building the future of work. One of the important factors which we need to take into account is that, generally speaking, leaders tend to have a higher preference for thinking than feeling. And so, based on the insights provided by the research, leaders may find it really quite a stretch to truly understand and be able to relate to the way their employees, their colleagues have actually experienced and perceived the last 12 months. I see there's just a question coming that I will answer quite quickly because it's very relevant to the section we've just done. And that is, what is the difference between intuition and sensing? Intuition is that all about that kind of gut feeling. We see and identify patterns, and we very much can live and work and experience the world of concepts, and we see opportunities developing, trends and patterns. Whereas sensing people have a higher sensing preference, tend to live much more in the here and now. It's about the information that they can actually take in. What are they seeing, feeling, hearing, tasting right here and now? And that's one of the basic kind of differences between intuition and sensing. So moving on, grief and guilt. The pandemic has forced numerous changes, unfamiliar emotions, new experiences into our lives in a very short period of time. From quarantining to homeschooling and everything in between, we've all been affected in our own personal ways, and we've seen the effects on those around us, especially our colleagues who we interact with on a regular basis. It's hard to find someone who hasn't been negatively affected by the pandemic. And it's easy to understand at kind of surface level why people are fed up, they're tired, fatigued, or just feeling completely kind of out of sorts with themselves. But what about those colleagues who don't seem themselves, but don't have an obvious reason why? What about the ones who haven't actually experienced a whole lot of negatives, or may have even actually benefited from the pandemic in some way? He doesn't have any kids. Why is he exhausted? Her husband got a raise during all this. What does she have to be stressed about? Even if these things aren't actually being said or even thought in the workplace, they could be what those that are unscathed believe their colleagues are thinking about them. After seeing all the awful things that people are going through, being the fortunate or the lucky one often weighs heavy on the individual. Often this results in feeling bad, talking about the good things in their lives, or venting about personal issues that appear trivial compared to what other people around them are going through, makes the individual feel guilty. And guilt can build when people feel more fortunate than others. And a new term has been developed to suit our current state. And that new term is pandemic guilt. It's that feeling that often arises in those who believe they made it out of the trauma better than those around them. For instance, amid the current pandemic, many companies were forced to reduce their staff. Pandemic guilt could affect those who remained employed while others did not. Whilst it may seem like nothing to worry about, it can affect our mental health and well-being. So what are the signs of pandemic guilt? Whether you're evaluating your own feelings or those of others, there's a few signs that we can kind of look out for to help it determine if the pandemic guilt is to blame. Those symptoms include changes in our sleep patterns or insomnia, lack of focus and finding it hard to concentrate or even to motivate ourselves. We kind of lose our mojo, I would say, our drive. Changes in our appetite, tiredness, fatigue, lack of energy, anxiety, feeling disconnected from others. Noticing any number of these signs could be a cause for concern, and the person suffering them may need to get some help through it. Research shows that women and people with a higher feeling preference are more likely to experience guilt than men or people with a preference for thinking. That's a very general statement, but it just kind of, again, has come out from some of the research that has been done. So if you know or suspect that a colleague is suffering from pandemic guilt, there are a few things you can do to help. Tell them what they're feeling is normal. Assure them that it's perfectly rational what they are feeling. It's resulting from their healthy sensitivity and compassion for others. And it's being driven by their awareness of the unfairness of life that we can't explain and control. Help them to define and take a break from triggers. Perhaps listening to the news or reading social media posts is only making things worse. Help them identify what it is that actually triggers those feelings of guilt so they can perhaps limit their exposure to it. Promote exercise. Being active, we know, is good for our mental health. It can help to raise our mood levels and improve our overall health. So perhaps encourage people to go out for a walk during lunch breaks to de-stress and kind of reset, recharge the batteries. Encourage people to pay it forward. While things are going well, encourage them to reach out to people who aren't as fortunate at that particular moment in time. Being able to help other people can, again, help to boost our own mood. And it provides a purpose for them to do amidst everything else that is going on at the moment. COVID-19 has made companies appreciate how important their staff are and how essential it is to ensure that employee well-being is at the top of that business agenda. Although times are currently tough for many businesses, leaders should not lose sight of the importance of that workplace health and well-being support. How an employer responds when an employee is dealing with a traumatic personal situation can have a significant impact. Dying Matters, Life After Death research found that 50% of people would consider leaving their job if their employer did not provide proper support in their time of need. Death is a difficult subject to talk about, but companies that have a robust set of policies in place and provide adequate support will find that they are much better equipped to help with staff who have suffered a bereavement. Grief does not only affect us when we have lost a loved one or someone close. On the news yesterday, it was said that due to the deaths caused by COVID, there are 6 million people in the UK alone grieving for someone they have loved or that they were close to due to the pandemic. But we should also remember that grief is affecting an even greater number of people because grief, as defined by Grief UK, is the conflicting feelings following a change or an end in a familiar pattern of behaviour. Right now, people are grieving for their old life, going into the office, meeting their friends after work, taking holidays, all the things that we very much used to do and often took for granted. So we need to think about how we can best support and help our people to understand and make sense of what they're experiencing and feeling right now as they're going through that grieving process. We're all in this together. We all have our own unique stories of how the pandemic has upended our lives. Now more than ever, it's important to be aware and understanding that those around us may be dealing with things that we can't see or possibly even relate to. Make an effort to be supportive and helpful whenever possible. Keep in mind seeking the help of a professional might be a good option if and when things start to feel overwhelming. We all have our ups and downs, and from time to time. So don't feel bad about asking for or receiving help from others. It'll all come back around eventually if we do our part to play it forward when we can. So moving on now to look at the leadership shortage. Nearly 70% of HR professionals aren't confident their organisation currently has the right people to guide the company into the future. And that was according to a Corn Ferry survey. Worse, only 14% of them say they are confident that their organisation has identified the right people internally as high potential talent. Finding talent has been a major concern for several years. In an earlier Corn Ferry study, it said that by 2030 there will be a global human talent shortage of more than 85 million people, or roughly that's equivalent to the population of Germany. Of those surveyed, 82% said their firms are placing greater emphasis on finding future leaders now than they were 5 years ago. Traditional routes towards leadership have often been designed for siloed, heavy structured roles that involve getting one group of people to do one thing really well. But this kind of leadership may not fit the future of work, as more workers of different backgrounds and disciplines are grouped together to work on projects. There's more collaboration taking place. So why do we have a shortage of great leaders? Actually, over the last couple of weeks, I read an article and I was desperately trying to find it again so I'd quote the source of it. But I was reading this article about leadership shortages. And one of the reasons they cited was that there was insufficient younger people coming through that are actually interested in becoming a leader. They're not looking for the pressures that come with a leadership role as much as people used to do. Another possible reason is the lack of investment in quality leadership development programs, and that was according to some research carried out by Oxford Economics. Companies are ill prepared for leadership challenges and are not doing enough to meet the future demands. As millennials enter an increasing number in our workplaces, it's widely acknowledged that their expectations of work are very different. But sadly, many leaders don't really understand what those differences are, or indeed what it actually means for the way we lead people in our future workplaces. Leadership is becoming more human. We're starting to see trends in people first leadership, and companies are now striving for more diverse and inclusive workplaces. Millennials refuse to be a statistic, a worker who comes in, does their jobs, and leave. And they're starting to take that philosophy with them as they do start to progress through our organisations. Leadership is about behaviour and not personality traits. If you think about people you've regarded as a great leader, the reasons you would probably give as to why you think they are a great leader are things that they do or have done and not about their personality. The fact is, leadership is about what people do and not what people are. As science has shown, behaviours are learnt and developed. Leadership behaviours are the same. Leadership is a set of learned behaviours, which, when we reflect upon the way we typically develop leaders, may account for why there is a world shortage of great leaders. According to Erica Anderson, author of Leading So People Will Follow, they say, like most things, leadership capability falls along a bell curve. That most people who start out with a modicum of innate leadership capability can become very good or even great leaders. The starting point for future-proofing our organisations is to invest in developing a more human and compassionate style of leadership. Or as Dr. David Rock says, putting the human back in organisations. Some of you may know the work of Jacob Morgan as he writes for LinkedIn on the future of work. According to research that Jacob has done, there are 6 key drivers shaping the future of leadership. Artificial intelligence and technology, and the pace of change. We only have to think back over the last 12 months to see the rapid pace of change and how much can be actually accomplished now in such a short space of time. The new technologies that have developed even in the last 12 months. The new talent landscape. Recent years have brought tremendous change to the overall talent landscape, and it's only just beginning. As older employees retire and younger generations enter the workforce, many companies find themselves on that constant hunt for skilled employees. At the same time, diversity and inclusion are becoming even more important. The new talent landscape is more than just changing demographics. It's a new approach to attracting and retaining talent, while also training and upskilling employees to be prepared for the future of work. Leaders of the future should strive to develop diverse teams and create an inclusive environment. They need to invest in upskilling employees while also finding ways to involve older employees and motivating employees of all ages to take control of their own career development. Purpose and meaning. While companies used to be able to easily attract top talent with a promise of a high salary, that's no longer the case. Employees want to work for an organisation that offers purpose and meaning. And it's even been said that they're willing to take a pay cut to do so. Employees want to see their efforts are impactful and that they're contributing to the overall purpose of the company and the society. To set the example, leaders must first understand their own job, their own purpose, their impact and meaning before helping employees to do the same. They need to get to know employees individually and to understand what motivates them. Morality, ethics, and transparency. Gone are the days of controlling leaders trying to be the smartest person in the room. A recent push for morality, ethics, and transparency has led to a more authentic and humble style of leadership. Leaders are being put under a microscope as people demand transparency. Leaders can no longer hide behind their title. They must be open and honest to their companies and the public. Leaders of the future must determine their own moral compasses and have a strong sense of their personal beliefs. Simply standing still is no longer good enough. Leaders need to take a stand and be as transparent and authentic as possible. Globalization. As technology grows, the world becomes smaller and we were more connected. Each country used to be its own economy, but now we can work with and communicate instantly with people all over the world. All businesses are now global and have that potential for worldwide customers and employees. Future leaders need to embrace globalization by becoming global citizens who appreciate different cultures, know how to communicate across cultural and language barriers. Leaders of the future need to pay attention to global issues and understand what is happening around the world. Future-ready leaders need to understand trends and be ready to adapt their leadership approach for changes in the way that we think, the way we work, and the way that we live. When we look at the skills and qualities that leaders will need in the future, then always in the top 2 or 3 are the human interpersonal skills, closely followed now by high-level cognitive skills such as problem solving, creativity, and decision making. And these are the skills that will differentiate leaders in the future. They're also the skills that many of our leaders and future leaders are lacking. But the good news is that these are all skills and qualities which we can learn and develop. Behaviour drives performance, and research confirms that the one thing that all effective and successful leaders have in common is that they have higher than average levels of emotional intelligence. There is a direct link between performance and self-awareness, self-management, and understanding others. In contrast, we only have to look around organisations. We all have seen those leaders who have little or no awareness of how their actions and behaviours are actually impeding the success of their teams. Their levels of EQ, emotional intelligence, are really quite low. Their understanding and empathy for others is lacking, as is their understanding of their own behaviours and the appropriateness of those behaviours for the situation. They find it very difficult to be able to adapt their behaviours. And unfortunately, the cost of their lack of agility to both the organisation and themselves can really be very high. Leadership is not something to be learned and then ticked off as being completed. Developing leadership capabilities is a continual process. All leaders can improve their performance and effectiveness. One of the first conversations I have when talking about leadership development is that importance of a leader understanding their behavioural preferences, how their behaviours impact on people, understanding the preferences of others, and then having that ability to what we call flex their style, flex their behavioural style to align it to the other parties, to the other people, and to the situation. So, developing as a leader. The question I get asked the most when speaking about behavioural preferences, do they change over time? Well, sometimes I overhear people completing their behavioural map and say things like, if I had done this X years ago, it would be different. According to Carl Jung, over the duration of an individual's life, there is a shift in focus on the different mental processes. By that, I'm referring to thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. And those are the factors which influence our behaviour. Initially, an individual specialise by focusing upon their strongest 2 mental processes. And then later in life, we tend to move to our focus to become more of an all-rounder, more of a generalist by developing our weaker mental processes. I sometimes hear people refer to having mellowed as their dominant behaviours become less prominent and new behaviours influenced by other mental processes are developing. When considering behavioural preferences as opposed to personality styles, research has demonstrated that behavioural preferences are much more fluid. They can be learnt and developed using the plasticity of the brain. That's the ability to create and build new neural pathways. Hence, new behaviours can be formed and new habits developed. We also know from evidence neuroscience, that the things we pay attention to will develop in strength. Hence, if we believe Jung about the way in which our mental processes naturally develop and integrate what we know about the plasticity of the brain, This can provide great insights into how we can actually develop our leaders and their leadership behaviours to improve the effectiveness of our organisations. So, what if we do develop leadership behaviours and effectiveness in such a way that it mirrors the way Jung's mental processes naturally develop? If we look at the way many organisations identify their leaders, a team member does a great job, they get noticed. A supervisory position becomes available, the team member is promoted. On Friday, they're a team member, and on Monday, they're required to have developed a whole new set of skills and behaviours, which often are influenced by those less preferred mental processes. The probability is that at that point in time, the individual has developed their dominant first and second preferences and is skillfully using those behaviours. However, the chances are that their third and fourth mental processes are yet to be explored and behaviours developed. The analogy I use is when an individual is required to use less developed behaviours, it can be likened to writing, writing with the wrong hand. It feels awkward, it takes longer, requires more concentration, and ultimately is draining of energy. However, just as with our handwriting, the more conscious practice and focused attention given to the behaviour, the easier it will get, as new neural pathways are created and strengthened in our brains. As a leader's career progresses, the need to become less of a specialist and more of a generalist increases. To be effective as a leader, an individual must develop their behaviours and skills to provide inspiration, engagement, and motivation, to move team members towards achievement of organisational goals, whilst balancing their focus on skills and behaviours influenced by opposing mental processes, such as the setting the strategic direction, analysing data, predicting future trends, clarifying desired results, and removing barriers which are hindering their progress. Great leaders are the ones who have learnt to flex their leadership style, to move with ease around what we call the behavioural map. They adapt their style to accommodate the needs of the people and the situation that they face. They neither overuse or underuse their behaviours. They know exactly what is required and when it's required. A jigsaw discovery behavioural map enables leaders to plan their leadership development by building on their behavioural preferences and mapping out a development plan, which will increase their ability to navigate their behavioural map, leading to a more effective style of leadership. A question I get asked frequently is, what is the best behavioural profile to be a successful leader? Well, to find out, you'll have to read the copy of the ebook that we will be sending you, emailing out to you, called The Evolution of a Leader. And you'll be able to read my answer to that question in that book. So, what next? There are several ways that you can learn more and delve deeper into your behavioural preferences and leadership styles. On Monday, the 12th of April, we have a virtual showcase, which is free to attend. And we're going to walk people through the virtual learning experience and activities that we do with the jigsaw. But during that time, you'll also have an opportunity to complete your personal behavioural profile and then have a one-to-one coaching call to discuss that behavioural map following the session. We also have leadership development modules that if anybody is interested in, we can happily supply you details of the leadership development modules. It's part of our new learning pathways that we're developing. We also have a couple of free coaching 30-minute appointments, sorry, not coaching, a couple of free 30-minute appointments. So if anybody would like to book those, there's a couple of dates up on the screen, and we'll be sending an email out with the links to the recordings, etc. And we'll put this information in there so you don't have to worry too much about that at the moment. And there'll be a link to book a 30-minute appointment. Just if you'd like just to generally have a chat and further develop what we've been talking about here today, or if you'd like to find out more about the Jigsaw Discovery learning experiences or about becoming a licensee of the tool, just get in touch and we'll set up a consultation. We've also just done a soft launch of our new Jigsaw Discovery website. So please do, again, I'll put a link in the email that comes out to you. Please take a look at it, and we would welcome any feedback that you've got. There's also, we do offer one-to-one coaching sessions, as it says on there, if anybody actually wants to go further and deeper into their own behavioural profile and their leadership style. So there's just a few minutes left. If anybody has got any questions, pop them in the box and I'll have a look at those. Keep your eyes open for the links to the recording. It'll be tomorrow when that comes out. And also there'll be the links to the free book, etc. Okay, so thank you very much for those who want to get off. Thank you very much for attending and being with us today. Just looking at some of the, the questions. Got one, what is an agile communicator? Excuse me. An agile communicator is somebody who can actually adapt their behavioral style, their communication style to the individual they are speaking to or emailing, writing to, etc. So it's been able to move through the different communication styles. Now, we all do this to a greater or lesser extent naturally, but when we actually study it and get deep into it, it's using specific words for different styles of people. Two words that can mean exactly the same thing, but use the wrong word to the wrong person, and it can actually not land quite as effectively. It's about really getting communication that hits and lands. So people actually understand. It reduces those misunderstandings and mean that people will actually act more upon whatever the communication is. We've done that one. What research has been done on millennials that identify that they want to do more than a day's work and leave? Interested in the question asked. Motivation, number of percentage of millennials will with this view. I'd have to look that actually up with you. I haven't got all the facts and figures in my head, but I'm more than happy to have a look at that, and we can email you. I'll email you the research and information on that, Edwin. And another one, whilst the slide shows the factors affecting trends, what are the expectations of the potential leaders or indeed young workforce of the future? The young workforce of the future, like I said, they want a job that has purpose and has meaning. They also, they want that freedom, that autonomy. They're not, how can I kind of say this? When I was a child, I remember my grandfather, my father, they had a job and it was a job for life. They were totally committed and dedicated to that company. Nowadays, we're not. Society's very different. And many people have 2 or 3 jobs. And it is predicted that going forward, organizations will directly employ less people. And there'll be more people who are kind of freelance consultants type work, who will actually have several companies, organizations that they're working for. It won't be uncommon for people to have 3, 4 jobs, or obviously much shorter in hours. So there's a whole load of kind of research, and again, I can send you some links to information about the millennials. That's not a problem. So if there is any more questions or comments, I'm happy to take them, and if not, then we'll say thank you very much again for attending, and hope to see you at our next webinar, and I will be in touch with the ebook and the links to the recording. Thank you.